Okay, let's hit the ground running. First of all, thanks so much for joining us this month. We've been working very hard to get up to date as well on our past webinars for this year, which is almost done. So you'll receive an email shortly with a link to all the different various replays as well. So thanks for your patience on that one. We'll get those to you very shortly. But today is all about engagement data and looking at ways that we can specifically utilize digital body language and other forms of data to help us potentially adjust or maneuver the customer's journey ever so slightly. So we'll get onto that right away. But first of all, just by way of introductions, my name is Derek Bell. I'm the Customer Success and Marketing Director at Marketing Cube. On the line today as well, we have Jason O'Donnell, who is our Account Director, and Jason's helping with questions. So if you do have questions throughout the webinar, please utilize the message function, and we'll try and get to those as we move through the session. Let's have a closer look at our agenda today. So first thing is digital body language, and we framed this as a crash course for Eloqua users, so hopefully you'll enjoy the crash course. Taking that information and understanding that information then enables us to potentially think about altering the way we execute our campaigns. So if we have, simply fixed calendar types of communications, maybe we can look at modifying some of those. Now, there'll always be place for those, but there is a chance to maneuver and make some changes based on the data that you have, and we'll show you some ideas around doing that. And on that point, we'll show you three specific examples, or kind of two specific examples and one really cool idea to help you understand how to do that in a bit more detail. And then our usual final topic for the day is looking at understanding what's coming up in relation to releases and what has actually taken place already. Now, we did have a question that was submitted by Kath from Sydney. Kath is becoming a regular on the question, so we appreciate Kath doing that. So, Kath, your question was, how do I get the form to have the mobile number pop up only once you select yes to an SMS reminder? Most of you would have seen that when you registered. Let me just quickly jump into Eloqua and locate and show you exactly what Kath is talking about. So if we look at the registration form, so I'm just jumping in here quickly to the landing page. And if I look at that landing page online, alrighty, so the question is that Kath has is, when I select yes, please send me an SMS reminder, then the mobile phone number here drops down. So how do we do that? It's a very good question, Kath. That's not a native function to the platform. It requires a little bit of magic known as JavaScript. So there are two key things that happen here. Our geniuses at Marketing Cube have delivered this one for us. So they've developed some JavaScript. What this essentially is doing is pointing to a file that sits on a server that is our CSS and a whole range of other bits and pieces. Then combined with that, if I actually go to the form itself, there's something to do with the HTML name as well. Maybe it's this one. It's just very specifically, and I think there's no change there necessarily, but the secret is to not change the HTML name. So the name of that field, along with the JavaScript and along with the question, which is if they respond yes, then we expose the mobile phone field. Now, some of you had some challenges registering for the user group earlier this year, and that was completely and utterly my fault, nothing to do with the platform, because what I had done was I made the mobile phone field required, which was perfectly okay for the vast majority of people registering, because most of you have provided your mobile numbers over whatever period of time. And so it auto-populated. But for those newer users to the user group where we didn't have their mobile phone number, and they said, no, that's okay, I don't want an SMS, the form wasn't happy. And so that was a user error on my behalf. So nothing to do with that format, Kath. So essentially, three things working together there. On the landing page, some JavaScript to work with the form. And on the form itself, some very specific behaviors around HTML name. Right here is my understanding. And those things together work to deliver the experience that you see here. So if I say no, then you'll see that it also disappears. So that's how that's done. Now, if you'd like one just like that, simply talk to the support team and they can help you out. The secret, though, too, guys, is that once you go to additional functionality like that, you want to make sure that you always use the template builder to create forms and landing pages, because I promise you, you won't remember, and I didn't, you won't remember to always add JavaScript, etc. And you shouldn't have to. If you're using templates, then you don't need to worry about it. And even if the form you're using doesn't contain a mobile phone where you want it to drop down like that, then that's fine. There's no need to make any changes to the JavaScript. It just simply won't do anything, which is fine. So hopefully that answers your question, Kath. Let me jump into our next section, which is the crash course for digital body language. Now, for some of you who are newer to Eloqua, or perhaps some of you that may have been involved in the purchasing decision to buy Eloqua for your organization, there would have been a whole range of reasons as to why you chose Eloqua, but I would be surprised to understand if digital body language potentially wasn't one of those key things. So from your point of view as a marketing team, how are you able to take advantage of that information? So first of all, what is digital body language? Occasionally you'll see it abbreviated as DBL, but I promise anything I do, you won't see an acronym. I'll tell you exactly what it is. So digital body language, and as it says here, it's kind of basically the online equivalent of facial expressions. If you think of yourself sitting around a table at work, in a meeting, you can interpret people's body language probably quite easily, getting a bit of a feel for how enthusiastic or how lackluster they might be in relation to the topic at hand. And so our digital body language is a way that we can convey our interest potentially in certain things, or even our lack of interest if we're not looking at certain things. And that level of engagement can increase, right? It can just simply be looking at website pages, simply opening emails. But once we start to engage, that is to click on emails, click on links on pages, potentially submit forms, these show heightened levels of engagement or increased digital body language. Just to help you understand how effective digital body language can be by some independent third parties, we can see here that in the B2B buyers world, 87%, so the vast majority, 87%, said that online content has either a major or moderate impact on vendor preferences and selection. We can see there that certainly, and you've probably experienced this yourself, many of you would be in a scenario where you are a B2B buyer, whether you're looking to buy additional marketing assets or whatever it might be, you probably start that journey online, not new news, we know that. According to the CEB, 57% of typical purchase decision is made before a customer even talks to the supplier. And again, I can totally agree and acknowledge that particular point. That's my behavior. That's typically the way I would shop. And not just even from a B2B point of view, but even from a B2C point of view. I want to explore and understand a little bit before I potentially pick up the phone or walk into the store. So the objective for today is to try and understand how we're able to read and respond to that digital body language. Now, there are all sorts of business intelligence tools that you can get, but simply switching one on is not enough. Eloqua certainly gives you a range of functions, and certainly business intelligence is one of those through Insight. And Insight is great, but we need to get a little bit more granular. So focusing on some key points from Oracle in relation to some documentation they've done and research they've done in relation to digital body language, I wanted to share with you a range of key points to really help cement for you what digital body language is and a way to go about working with it. So the first one is you need to accumulate. And the only way you can accumulate digital body language is through a platform like Eloqua, for example. And it's not just storing it in Eloqua, it's about potentially trying to enrich that information from the CRM, website, even potentially from an external activity point of view, which is utilizing those real world face-to-face type events. So not really digital body language, but all of that information pulled together becomes incredibly valuable. So the first objective is to accumulate, to find, and the only way you can really accumulate is to start with your outbound campaigns. So the next one is around communicating digital body language. So this is really talking about the sales team and ways for you to take that information that you're collecting as a marketing team, which is pretty critical. I mean, you're doing it every single day with every single campaign you send. You're really building up information. So how do you get that information to the sales team? The easiest way to do that potentially would be to push that into the CRM platform or Salesforce automation system, whatever it might be, so that the sales team has access to it. You don't want the sales team to have to log into another platform. The CRM is where they spend their time, and the information based on the humans you're dealing with and the information you're gathering is best presented to the sales team from within the CRM. Now, another way to do that, of course, is utilizing Profiler, so Eloqua Profiler for sales. And here you can see an example. The team are looking around and they're looking at a particular profile, able to do that literally in the space of minutes. Now, it can appear, as you see on the screen right here, as a full screen that they can just log into. It can be embedded into most CRM platforms, etc. And remember, most of you have free access to at least 5 licenses, I think it is. So as an Eloqua user, you have access because you access Eloqua every day. However, for the sales team, it is a license that's required, and you do get some free ones to start with, at least 5. Depending on your edition of Eloqua, you may get up to 10 free licenses. So have a chat to either to Adrian or Jason or to your Oracle representative, and they can assist you with understanding what that is. So that's kind of a bit of a side note on how to communicate. Now the fun starts. The fun starts because now we have to really start to evaluate the digital body language and to understand what this engagement data is telling us. One of the more obvious ways to do it from an Eloqua point of view is utilize lead scoring. So if you're utilizing lead scoring, you're really taking advantage of the ability to look at that digital body language in concert with the person's profile. Those two things combined will be incredibly helpful. Not the be-all and end-all, but will be very helpful, and we'll talk a bit more about that in just a few moments. So one of the other points that is raised by this research is that the ability to accelerate the sales process. If you think about the fact that so many buyers on their journey are spending a lot more time online researching and understanding, that information is completely unknown to the salesperson unless you have something like Eloqua talking to your CRM platform. So by its very nature, as long as the smart and on-the-ball salesperson understands and appreciates the value this data can give them, then there's definitely the opportunity there for that whole process, or the sales process, to be accelerated by combining all of that information together for the sales team. And then cultivate. This is a fun one. So how do we cultivate the digital body language of our prospects with personalized lead nurturing campaigns that drive them back to the website? So we'll specifically talk about this one in just a few moments, but the process of doing this is completely dependent upon your ability to drive outstanding campaigns. Now, not every campaign you run is potentially going to be outstanding. I hope it is. But we need to manage that process. So we need to have there's kind of our always on type campaigns, there's regular things that we do, etc. But when we're starting to look at prospecting and really trying to understand that buyer's journey, then we can start to get a lot smarter about the way that we engage. So the way we use Eloqua to adjust people's journeys. So that cultivation process is really done through more communications, smarter communications, and probably cross-channel communications as well. The last point raised in the 6 steps is that this whole process can really help validate the marketing spend. So we've been through a fairly rigorous process recently at Marketing Cube to be a little bit more disciplined on this final step, looking at our various sources. Even if you take the user group as an example, we have the ability for people to join the user group straight from our website. We have other people who come into our database and disclose that they use Eloqua. So we have various campaigns in play that listen for that information and then invite them to become a member of the user group like you guys. And so we're just trying to get a little bit more empirical, if that's the right word, to really understand where these people are coming from and why, not why necessarily, but how they're joining the user group. So validate that marketing spend and that closed loop reporting. All of that information can help come together, and digital body language can play a key part in that. So again, just to summarize those points, accumulation of data, communicating to the sales team, evaluating that digital body language to try and understand what it means. By doing so, that's going to help accelerate the sales process. But we must always be cultivating digital body language, so it's more campaigns, it's smarter campaigns. And together with all of that information, it's really helping to validate that marketing spend. But today, based on what we had outlined for you, there are really 2 points that we wanted to focus on. 1, accumulate digital body language. Sorry, did I say 2? 1, accumulate digital body language, and 2, cultivate digital body language. So what does it mean? So really, that accumulation process, as soon as that person submits an Eloqua form or they open an email and they download the images, that's where the tracking starts to kick in. So that's when the cookies are dropped on their device, and that's when you start to accumulate that digital body language or that engagement data. So it just happens. It just happens, and it slowly grows and builds over time. The cultivation process, now that's really largely driven, as I've said there, by your outbound campaigns. It's what you're pushing out the door, essentially. So the more you can cultivate, the more you've got to play with, the more you've got to interrogate, and the smarter you can be with understanding the various stages of the journey. And then we can start to understand what we can do with this engagement data to actually modify the journey. And we'll get onto that here in just a moment. But just, I don't want to assume everybody's looked at Profiler, so I just want to quickly jump in to Profiler and give you an example of what that looks like. Okay. So we'll pick on Jason at Marketing Cube. So as an Eloqua user, you come into your contacts area, search for your relevant contact. When you double click on the contact, you arrive at this pop-up window, and you'll see the launch in Profiler down here in the bottom right-hand corner. So when I do that, a new window will open, and we'll start to see some of the data that's available for us to begin to have a closer look. And so if you kind of put your salesperson hat on right now, this is the interface that the sales team would typically see. And so once that information is visible, there are several ways it can be stored in the CRM. It can be stored in either activities, or you could embed this type of interface into the CRM platform. So there are a couple of ways to do it. This is probably a nicer, more engaging type of representation of the data versus just simply having activities of email sent, email opened. So for those of you that aren't familiar, essentially over on the left-hand side, we see the latest activity. We can see that Jason's been looking at a lab back in May. He's been looking at some emails, or he's opened some emails. So I can actually click on those emails, and we can see here it had to do with the junior user group. So that information he's got there. If we want to have a look at click-throughs, which is sort of a better indication of engagement, we can click through here a little bit further. Now, if you put your salesperson hat on, essentially what you're doing now is investing maybe no more than 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes max, and just having a very quick look at what it is the sales or what the prospect has been looking at in the last sort of day or so, essentially. So you can see activity across the top, sort of represented by different activities. So whether it's web pages, email sends, etc. So you can play with all of those and drill through and click, etc. So we can look at web pages. So he's off to the home page, looking at different industries on the website. Obviously, you'll become very familiar with your own URLs, and you'll start to know exactly what they look like. So that's what that is. And some information for our friends at Oracle. Looking at a campaign there. So loads of information that is available. You'll notice also that the lead scores can be displayed here as well. And we have a few different active lead scores, so I just need to choose the relevant one. In this case, as a customer, so Jason's not a customer, he is in fact internal, which means it's slightly different, but here's a B1. So if Jason was a lead and Jason was buying from us, that would be a pretty good lead score to run with. So that's Profiler. So that's one way that information becomes visible to the team. The next point we wanted to raise was this idea of graduating from fixed calendar communications. to really begin to listen and engage with your audience as they engage with you, essentially. So we say partially graduate because there'll always be a place for these regular types of campaigns, these campaigns that have to go out on a fixed schedule. But when you've got other campaigns woven in amongst all of that, you need to think of ways and strategies to try and avoid a situation where people might become a little overwhelmed. A couple of ways you can do that. First of all, you really need to make some time to evaluate your campaign performance, especially those repetitive ones. If we're just simply loading them up every week, let's, for argument's sake, say it's a weekly newsletter, we're loading up every week, we don't really look at who's doing what, the focus is just to simply get the information out the door, you could be missing an opportunity, and you could also be annoying some people. If you've got people in that segment who haven't opened the last 6 emails, logic would kind of ask the question, well, why bother emailing them again this month? Maybe give them a break, or perhaps give them a slightly different experience and a different subject line to hopefully really capture their attention, to encourage them to visit the preference center or share with you a little bit more up-to-date information about what interests them, to ensure that the information you're sharing is really actually helpful to them. If they're just not opening anything, maybe it's FOMO and a little bit of fear of missing out, but engage that group. Try and engage that group, essentially. Don't just keep delivering the same thing over and over and over again. The other point to really think about is inclusions and exclusions. So we'll talk a little bit about this in the adjusting the experience too. Okay, so I've just got a question popped in here from Jason. It's from Bridget. Is there a way you can change the sender name in Eloqua Engage? Or alternatively, is there a way you can send attachments in Eloqua? Thought I could add. Okay, so let's have a look. Sending attachments is a no, Bridget. Certainly by default, that's a no. What you would be able to do is always load the documents into Eloqua and share via a URL. Attachments typically give you issues at firewalls and impact deliverability. So Eloqua, like most of the marketing automation platforms, will just give you a link where people can access that information. That answers that one. Now, can you change the sender name in Eloqua Engage? So Eloqua Engage is designed as a single user license exercise, with the objective being that the person using Engage is the person from whom the email is coming. So your question would imply that you're in a situation where you've got somebody using Engage, but you don't want the email coming from that person. You want it to, in fact, come from somebody else. If you could clarify that with Jason, I'll keep an eye on that and we'll come back to that for you. The other thing that I think sometimes avoid, or not avoid, but maybe we miss doing, is using the information that people have given us to really tailor their journey. So if they've disclosed information along the way, we're not using that information. It's just kind of sitting there. That's something else to think about. I'll show you in a moment a quick way to have a look at some of that data so you can be clear on how much you have and what's available. And then kind of that last point there, which we talked a bit about just a few moments ago, don't be afraid to stop sending people content if they haven't engaged with, for example, the last 6 emails in a particular campaign or series. Just simply keep hitting them with emails doesn't do you any good from a campaign performance stat point of view, but also from a customer experience point of view, it's not the best outcome. If they're not engaging, they're not engaging. Just on that third bullet point, use the information people have given you to tailor their journey. For example, if you're deciding that industry classification is an important value that you need to have within your contacts, and it will alter the journey that you're delivering, let me just show you a quick way that you can have a look at that information. So it will depend on your level of access to Eloqua, but you can access the settings area up here at the top right-hand corner. And from the top right-hand corner, over under task, you've got manage fields and views. So once you get in here, and it will depend on where you hold the information, but if I look, for example, industry, oops. There's industry. When you scroll to the bottom here, you've got an option called View Population Details. Here you can see in our instance of Eloqua, the number of individuals who have identified themselves, or we have identified through other information, largely from the CRM, which industry they're in. You can see that there is 2,734 people that we don't know which industry they're in. And in a nutshell, really, that in and of itself could be the purpose of a campaign, to try and get that information so we can then tailor more information further down the track. So you can see education and training, other services, wholesale trade, retail trade, etc. So looking at that information, I can sort of think to myself, well, you know what? I think there's a good opportunity for us to do some industry-based campaigns. Because when I look at that information in our little world at Marketing Cube, those numbers would represent enough of an audience for us to potentially go and have a discussion and try and work out some very specific campaigns. So the point I'm trying to make here is one, it's good to come up with ideas, etc., and to understand what you're trying to achieve, but you need to have the underlying data in order to do that. At least coming here, you can see at a high level the type of data that you have, and then from there you could go into segmentation, and from a segmentation point of view, start to drill down a little bit further, breaking it out by customers and prospects, inactive or unsubscribed, etc., to kind of get to a much better number of people that you can actually talk to. So something for you to think about. So the point here, just sort of, if this is a fixed calendar and maybe you're doing 3 newsletters a month, 2 webinars, and you have these conferences, these 2-day conferences that run every fortnight on different topics, and maybe even off-site conferences that you run over a weekend. Whatever those fixed types of events or campaigns are that you're running, you want to be aware and sensitive to that information as you think about nurturing campaigns. And that comes back to the point about utilizing inclusion as much as you would exclusion. So if people are going through a buyer's journey, there may be something in this screen that is relevant to them, but there may be others that are not so relevant to them. So we always want to make sure that we're excluding some people from certain aspects. So how can we impact your customer's journey with engagement data? Hopefully from what we've talked about already, you've sort of got some ideas floating around in your head. Let's talk about it in a bit more detail. Okay, so Bridget, that's right. We want to send attachments from the company name, but we can't send those in Eloqua, and they only come from the user's name in Engage. I suppose the question, let me throw an example at you, Bridget. So we have a client who provides services and product to the retail trade industry. In that process, they have a whole range of different price lists, etc., that need to be delivered to people over time. And this was a very manual process with one poor individual spending way too much time by a fax machine. So what they did is they devised all of these PDFs that were the price lists. And then those PDFs were stored on a server which communicated with Eloqua. And in the process of communicating with Eloqua, what it actually communicated to Eloqua was a URL. That enabled Eloqua to send out emails to literally hundreds, I want to say thousands, but potentially just a few thousand people, where every single email that went out actually had a link to a unique price list. Lots of different variables and as to why people get different price lists. That way they were able to send an email with a link to a unique document. If the document you're sending or you're wanting to send is not unique, I'm struggling to understand, and it's hard over a webinar, I appreciate, to understand why you couldn't simply provide a URL. If it's the same PDF, a URL would achieve the same result and you'd have a much better chance of deliverability. But maybe we can take that one offline, if you like, and talk about that in a bit more detail. But then hopefully that one example shows you there is certainly some flexibility and smarter ways to go about that process potentially. Alrighty, impact your customer journey with engagement data. So what we wanted to do here was to provide you with some examples. We've got where to start. It really means that you need to dig a little bit deeper, and that means dashboards, it means insight, and it also a bit about how much data you have available. And so on that first point, that kind of recaps what I just showed you when we were looking at that field, the industry field. At least get a bit of an understanding of exactly what the data is that you have available and that you're able to segment by. Then the next step I would suggest is to evaluate the performance of campaigns that serve prospects on their buyer's journey and customers for their onboarding journey. So understand if you've got campaigns that are in play today, have a close look at those, understand which emails are performing better than others, and then work out which ones that potentially need to change or modify. And then we can start to understand where we need to potentially modify the journey. And we'll show you some examples here in just a moment. So look at what your highest performing content is, who is it targeted at, and who has not seen that content, because you could do a little bit of recycling. And also think multi-channel. Think about driving net new contacts to your assets via social, for example. We have a webinar we're running on the 4th of July, which has kind of hit critical mass. I think we're almost at 73 registrants. It's quite interesting to look at the response to that particular webinar and how people are coming along. What's interesting is the tracking in the back end for us to see where those people are coming from. And so I think at last count, we had out of that 69, there are about 15 or so that are net new additions to our database. So these are people that we've not specifically spoken to previously, but they have seen some of the advertising across LinkedIn or Google, etc., and have responded. So it'll be interesting to follow that process through. So one of the key things that will help you in this process, because if the whole point or premise of today's webinar is to look at using engagement data to modify your customer's journey, we really need to understand what the customer's journey is. Some of you have probably been through this process, and you probably have and if you haven't, you probably have a bit of a gut feel as to what that journey looks like. But until you actually really have that customer journey mapped out and defined, it makes it a little bit harder to really look at ways to modify that journey. We can adjust the journey based on the data that you have or that you're yet to obtain. Using forms, the CRM, and other sources is certainly a guide to that person's journey, but also lead scoring. So lead scoring, you can use that to adjust the journey, and that makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't fit or doesn't answer every single question that you might have about ways to modify the journey. So let's jump in and have a look at a few scenarios. And the first scenario we're going to look at, or the first cool idea, is looking at lead scoring and how you can use lead scoring to actually adjust a person's journey. First thing, of course, you need to have a lead score model in place. And we're going to use a shared filter in order to do this. And we would do it from the campaign canvas, but you can also do it from segments as well to qualify people before they come into the campaign. But if it's a nurturing campaign, there's every chance that along the way, there might be 5, 10, 15, or 20 different emails in your lead nurturing campaign, that the information you have when a person enters the campaign, hopefully, is far less than by the time they exit the campaign. So across those various emails, there'll be various calls to action. Some will be purely informational. Others will have calls to action for them to download and access information. And it's through those form submissions that you're able to build on the profile data that you have. There's every chance that along with that engagement, and they're filling in forms and filling in data that's going to enhance their profile, that the person's lead score would actually improve in the course of that particular campaign. So at a very basic level, not very basic, but a somewhat basic level, we would take leads that are potentially equal or higher to their A12 or B12. And we'll show you the interface here in just a little minute. But that shared filter is really helpful because the shared filter enables you to ask the question before each email is sent. So if you felt that their engagement and their profile had now reached a certain level, and because of that, they're perhaps it's no longer appropriate for them to continue in that particular journey, then you can use a shared filter to help you do that. So here's an example from Eloqua of a shared filter. So this is the window. You'll see it's very similar to creating a segment. Really, it's all of I think they're all pretty much identical actually, all the filters you see on the right-hand side. In this particular example, we've chosen compare lead score. So you can see we drag that into the center of the screen. We've nominated the following lead score model, which is our most current lead score, which is from April this year. And we've identified those with a profile of A or B and engagement of 1 and 2. So in our world, that would identify a fairly highly qualified individual from the point of view of our campaigns. How do we do that? Okay, so that's great. We've got the shared filter. We've built out our shared filter. Then we need to throw it onto the canvas. So once we get to the campaign canvas, you'll see there are two locations here, and this is just an example of what you might do. So we send out the first email, out it goes. We then have an evaluation period set. We want to see if they've clicked on the email. If they have, that's great. Now, before we send the next email, heading off in this direction, we might ask the question, do they have a lead score of A1 or A12 or B12? And if they don't, that's fine. We'll continue on that particular journey. However, if they do, then as one example, you may then take them from this campaign, this lead nurturing campaign, and move them into another one. That's one example of how you can do that. Now, you can also use lead scoring from a segmentation point of view. So if we look over in segments within Eloqua, you'll see a pretty similar type of construct. Here, what we're doing is potentially looking at an annual thought leadership conference. We're targeting those people who are in Australia, Singapore, or New Zealand, and are highly engaged leads. The use of the lead score, which we do quite often. So we have two lead score models largely. We have a few, but two primary ones that we use. One is called customer engagement, and the other is called now lead score. So lead score is very much that. It's a lead score for leads, so prospects, individuals who are not currently engaged with Marketing Cube from a financial point of view. And then we have a customer engagement score. So this is driven by certain statuses within the CRM to confirm that an individual is a customer, that is a customer who has bought from us, buying services or whatever it might be. And so we will often use the different lead scores to filter out the different types of communications that we have with both customers, but also with prospects. So essentially what we're doing there is really focusing on those people who are engaged with us, and in turn, we're trying to get information back to them. A really good way for you to utilize lead score in two examples, and both of those can, well, I don't want to say dramatically, but they can certainly alter the experience or the customer journey based on the engagement data that you have. And so you can see there, that's the lead score. So if you simply type in the word lead or LEA even, outcomes compared lead score. And you can drop that in and select it just as you did on the previous one. Let's have a look at cool idea number 2. So more specifically now looking at lead nurturing campaigns. The nice thing when you look back at the lead score is great. It certainly shows you at a very high level the person's engagement and their profile, that they, essentially they fit the bill, they're the right sort of person, their engagement is kind of where we think it should be, etc. But from a lead nurturing campaign, the general goal that you have along the way is to obtain information about both the prospect and your organization. And now the buyer could be a range of individuals. It could be a student, it could be a potential business partner, it could be a donor if you're a not-for-profit organization. Based on your definition, that will differ for everybody, but based on your definition of a marketing qualified lead, you should have, or you will have, a pretty clear idea about the profile points that you need. So if we think about those profile points that you need, it might be about being in a specific industry. It might be about a certain geography. It may be about the annual revenue of a particular company. It could be about the size of their sales team or the size of their marketing team. How many bodies do they have, etc. There'll be all these different variables that you have. And so we need to put those variables behind forms. So as we present people with different types of content, that we slowly collect that information over time. Now, in amongst all that information that you're collecting, there may be some pretty specific and key pieces of information that could fundamentally alter the journey based on their engagement. The lead score model, as I said here in that last bullet point, is good. However, if you really want to modify a person's journey, you probably need to have specifics or lack of specifics. So let me show you what I mean. So here what we're doing is we're back on the campaign canvas and we're using an element called compare contact fields. So what we're able to do here is people can flow through the campaign, etc. Again, we might ask if they've clicked. Now, in this particular campaign, it may be that what's super critical to you is to really filter out and find those people who are in the information media and telecommunications industry, as an example. So what I can do here is take that information and actually capture it. Well, not actually capture it, I'm observing the data, sorry. So if that information is available against that particular contact, I can then move that person out of that campaign potentially into a new campaign, which is now very specific and targeted to both information media and telecommunications. So the compare contact fields option, which you'll see as a decision step over here on the far left-hand side of the screen by the campaign canvas, is a great way for you to be able to start to adjust a person's journey based both on profile and then in concert with other steps on the campaign canvas with their digital body language as well. So that's a way for you to use two types of information to really route people quite differently. It will all come down to what's the most important thing really for a marketing qualified lead. Is it absolutely critical a person be in a certain industry? What is it? What is that information? Now you'll notice also that you have the ability to compare custom object fields as well. So if you have information tucked away on a custom object field, you could use that information as well. Now there are other options that you can see here. Certainly one that I find, sent email with a question mark. This can be really helpful when you're trying to reference a different campaign. And if somebody has been sent an email from a different campaign, therefore you know they got the information, and you may want to then route them in a slightly different direction. So that one can be quite helpful. I don't use it a ton, but when I do use it, it's incredibly helpful. Whoops, let me go back. So all of those various options, or those decisions, as they're called over here on the left-hand side, are really the ways for you to interrogate not just profile information. So compare contact fields is largely profile information, but hopefully that information has been added by the person as they've gone through different campaigns with you. But you've got a combination of both digital body language, and so keeping in mind the shared filter, which is the one we used a moment ago to present the lead score options, that a shared filter can be incredibly helpful. That's where you get very granular about website behavior. So you'll notice there's an option here under decisions called visited website with a question mark. So that simply means, have they visited any page within your organization that has the Eloqua tracking script? Okay, so it's not telling you, it doesn't give you the option to have a single URL. If you want to do a single URL and you want to be very specific about a page, a website page that they've looked at, then you would use a shared filter in order to do that, make that very specific. So there's a few more ways there that you can use that engagement data along with profile data to potentially adjust a person's journey. Now, just as much as you may want to include somebody, there could also be some reasons as to why you may want to exclude some people. So if we look at the integration between Eloqua and your CRM platform, one of the key integrations is with the opportunity object. So you'll have leads, which simply integrates directly through from the CRM to Eloqua's contact. But then you have the opportunity object, which Eloqua sees as a custom object. And so it pulls that information in. And if you have a close look at this one on the screen right now, I imagine you can kind of figure out what's going on. So what we're looking at is anyone who is in an opportunity that is open and is at the stage of either proposal, price quote, or negotiate and review. So these two stages of the sales process in our world at Marketing Cube are right down towards the end of the funnel. The next one is either closed won or closed lost. That's basically it. If you feel that at that particular point, you don't really want to have marketing content dropping into people's inboxes, then you can use a shared filter like this. And this is not necessarily campaign specific to guys, as with so many shared filters. Shared filters almost kind of a little bit of a library. In some cases, yes, they'll be very campaign specific, but something like this is really quite generic. There's nothing campaign specific about this. So this one filter could be used across multiple campaigns. So let's have a look at a canvas and a little bit clearer on how you might do it and how we would use it at Marketing Cube. So what we want to do here is, if you imagine this is a nurturing campaign, very basic, I appreciate, for the case of the example. People come in the top from a segment member, we might wait for a period of time. Then we ask the question, are they at stage open and towards the end of the funnel? If it's a yes, we then have them exit through here on the right-hand side. If not, off they go, then they wait, etc. And then each time before we send the next email, so email number 2, before it gets sent, again, we check to see which sales stage, which opportunity stage that particular person is in. Now you'll notice over here on the right-hand side, as I've exited those people, I've just used a wait step to do that. And I've said 5 days. I've said 5 days. The only reason is that it just means that if I'm looking at the canvas regularly, I can see those people. Oops, I keep clicking on the screen, sorry. I can see those people just literally sitting there as a number eventually. Now, another way that you can see that is through entry and exit reports. So let me quickly show you how that's helpful. Let's have a look. Here we go. You should all be sitting inside this particular campaign. So over here on the right-hand side, you'll see the campaign settings area, and you'll see entry and exit reports. So the entry report is like so. So it breaks down and shows you everybody that's coming to that particular campaign and their entry type and how they got there. The exit one, I'm just thinking no one will have exited that campaign yet. No, you haven't. But the campaign step type and campaign step name. So this one right here. So from a nurturing campaign point of view, they often can run, or they can often run for 6 or maybe even 12 months by naming them. So if I go back to that screenshot for you, if these simply said wait, 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 when you looked at that campaign exit report and it said step name, it would just simply say wait, 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 and you'd have no idea. You'd have no idea exactly when the person exited the campaign. So by naming these, there's huge dividends for you in the rest of the reporting being a lot more helpful, because you'll then be able to see exit campaign 001, which would tell you that they weren't sent email 001. It's free text, you can write in there whatever you want to write in there, but whatever you do write in there will appear here under campaign step name in your campaign exit report. So just a little tip for you to help understand what's going on and who's exiting, etc. That can be quite interesting. You can export that information, by the way. You'll see here there's an export button. So for a campaign that's been running for quite some time, you could then export that information and just analyze and find out, well, when are people exiting this campaign? Are they in fact going all the way through and everybody's exiting after the final email? Or are there particular points where you're seeing people exiting more frequently? And so keeping in mind in this example, it's completely driven by the filter and whether or not the person is in an active sales cycle. So that's an example of where you can use the engagement data combined with CRM data, combined with profile data to really modify that journey and personalize that journey. Are there any questions on that point? Okay, there's a question here from Steve. Is there a way to set up an entry report in Insight? So an entry report, for all intents and purposes, would make the person a campaign member, Steve. So when you look at the campaign analysis overview report within Eloqua, it talks about campaign members, then emails sent, emails delivered, etc. So those campaign members, that number would be the campaign entry. But I would imagine from what we just looked at here on screen, you probably want a bit more information like you can see on the screen here. So I'd have to find out that one for you. My gut feel tells me no, but let's not stop at no. Let's see what we can find out. So Jason and I will work on that one and come back to you, Steph. You're welcome. All right, cool idea number 3. So cool idea number 3 is kind of me pushing things back on you just a little bit. There's a ton of information to really help you understand the campaign canvas in more detail. And a lot of it is really hinged on the campaign canvas. So going back to our original point today, which was looking at ways to use engagement data to modify our customer journey, that modification of the journey really happens on the campaign canvas. And you see there that we were utilizing other areas like shared filters and lead scoring. So the first step is to really familiarize yourself. Now, for some of you, I appreciate you've got databases with 1 million plus contacts, and you can't possibly familiarize yourself. But I would encourage you to potentially look at the contacts that you're working with. So if in that huge database, there's a segment or a cohort that you're working with, try and get to understand that data, understand what those people are doing, what they're looking at, how often they're engaging, all of that kind of stuff. The more you can do to understand that, the better position you'll be in to actually work out how to modify a person's journey. Now, one way that you can really find some helpful information is in the in the Eloqua Help Center. So in the Help Center, you'll find a section called Campaign Canvas Elements. And essentially, it's broken down to those 4 areas that you can see right there. so that we just saw a moment ago here on the canvas. So the big one, I think the fun ones really are decision and action, so decisions and actions. And if we take decisions as an example, this is the page that walks you through all of those decisions and gives you a complete breakdown of exactly what is available by each step. So if you look at the campaign canvas and you think to yourself, oh, I've got no idea what half of those elements do, make some time, come into the Help Center, and you'll find there's loads of information here to take you into quite a bit of detail, but not too much that you can kind of get like, oh my gosh. But you can come through here and you can start to see what all of these things can do. And there's really quite a large list. And the list keeps going. The interesting one is that evaluation period. That's a question. You'll see it's sort of under each one there. There's 4 bullet points. Understanding how long the evaluation periods are and at what frequency Eloqua will recheck things for you. So loads of information right there directly within the canvas. Sorry, I keep saying it, the Help Center. So that covers off our 3 points. And we're on to what's new and what's coming. The next release of Eloqua will be release 19C, which is due in August of this year. And right now, this is about all we know. That's kind of imagining that's me staring at the clouds. So no information has been published at this stage. I haven't even really heard rumors to date in relation to what's happening in 19C. But they seem to be delighting us with each release at the moment. So as soon as that information is available, we will let you know. But just quickly to recap, for those who weren't with us last month or for the May user group, the in-app guidance, hopefully you've seen that now. That's in the email editor and the landing page editor. It's the question mark on the far right-hand side. So if you're new to Eloqua, click on that question mark. It slides out. You'll find some videos and different resources that relate very specifically to emails or to landing pages, depending on which editor you're in. Progressive profiling, the new forms are now fully functioning. They've got progressive profiling, everything you need. If you've got any old forms that you are kind of using on an ongoing basis, you may want to save as those forms as soon as possible and retire the old ones. So simply doing save as will convert that form from the classic design to the new design editor form layout. So very simple process. Then for the admin types amongst us, if you're running Salesforce with Eloqua, there's a brand new app that's now generally available. Basically, it's all about speed. So speed is critical to you. And when I say speed, I'm talking seconds. Seconds from a form submission of an unknown contact into Eloqua, straight through Eloqua, bang, bang, and it's right into the lead object or the contact object, etc., wherever you need it to be in Salesforce. So please have a chat with Jason or Adrian, and happy to have a chat with you further on that one if you have questions. Custom object updates in relation to deletion of individual records and also field level tracking enhancements as well. So you've got options there, or more options available if you're an admin. So just to reiterate in relation to forms, everybody, so that we're all crystal clear, starting in August, which is the next release, so I suppose that's the only thing we do know about 19C at this point, is that you won't be able to create new assets using the classic form design editor. So everything else will remain editable, form processing will function, all of that sort of stuff. But by May next year, so 2020, which I appreciate, it feels like a long way away, everything will be view only, a classic form design editor. So you've got some time, but just don't leave that one until the early weeks of May 2020, if possible. If you need a hand, please reach out. We're more happy to help in that process with you. And that's save as function. So here we are in the old classic form design editor. Up in the top right-hand corner, you click on save as, so not save, but save as. Go through that process, and shazam, you'll have a brand new form in the new form editor. Let me just check the questions here. If you do have any questions, please shoot those through. Alrighty. Well, if that's it, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. We're just right on time, so thanks so much for spending some time with us, and we will see you next month. Thanks again, everybody. Have a great weekend. Try and stay cool or warm, depending on where you are in the world. Cheers. Thank you.